which represents state and municipal government workers. They're here in the WNHA studio today to discuss some of the hot button issues their unions are tackling these days in New Haven and at the state capitol. Welcome, folks, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
You got to be two of the busier people I know, so we're honored that you made time to come on the Dateline in Haven. Larry, you're part of the coalition. AFSCME is part of the coalition of unions.
Correct.
That negotiate with the governor on state employee contracts for the roughly about 50,000 state employees, right?
Less. It's somewhere in the mid-40s.
Mid-40s, and I'm going to ask you to get the mic real close to you, if you don't mind.
Is that better?
That's really good. And Larry, so we've been reading about in the last day, we have a budget crisis in Hartford. We're looking at an estimated $5 billion deficit over the next 2 years because of declining revenues. And we're going to get to a discussion in a little while about revenues versus cuts. But in the meantime, there's been a lot of pressure on the state unions saying, especially from Republicans and business leaders, saying we've got to make cuts to our employee agreements, both pension agreements and health agreements and wages, because we got to cut that deficit. And the news has been over the last day, I was reading the Connecticut Mirror, that there's a tentative deal, not a final deal, with the governor's office and the unions that would freeze workers' pay for 3 years, have workers increase how much they pay for pension and health care benefits, and take 3 furlough days. And in return, the state would agree to make no changes in the contract for 5 years in benefits. They'd be extended 5 years. There'd be a freeze on a guarantee of no more layoffs. And you'd also agree to that wage freeze. So is that what we're hearing? Is that sounding right?
Well, let me try to clarify a couple of things, and also ask Harry just to make sure we spell Cherlyn's name right.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry
it's
about
Pindexter. P-O-I.
How's that for the answer? So
that's the man who deals with media.
There's a little bit of misinformation that is no fault of any reporters covering the situation. There is
and again, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to move the mic toward facing you directly.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So sorry about that. So regarding state employee union discussions with the Malloy administration, there is no agreement. I can't emphasize that enough. There is no agreement. There's not a tentative agreement. There is not any kind of agreement. We are currently engaged in discussions with the administration, trying to find mutually agreeable solutions to ease the economic crisis. That's to the credit of our unions that they entered into these discussions, but there is no tentative agreement because what would have to happen is once the framework of any such agreement is reached, the 15 leaders of the State Employee Bargaining Coalition have to vote to bring that framework back to the member, and that hasn't happened yet. And I think there's a rush to report that there's some kind of tentative agreement. That would be the incorrect way to describe it, Paul. But again, no tentative agreement. Certainly making progress. Certainly doing our best to get to reach some mutually agreeable solutions and bring something back to the members potentially, but that requires a vote of our leadership, and that has not happened yet. And part of the problem is the Malloy administration itself leaked out information that was inaccurate yesterday to a bunch of reporters. So that's why I say no fault of the media. I don't know why the administration chose to do that, but they did, and we have to live with that. But,
so your message from you is not so fast.
Not so fast.
No deal yet.
But we recognize the depth of the crisis. We also feel we didn't cause this crisis, and the people who are calling for deep cuts tend to be representing and advocating for people who don't want to sacrifice and don't want to contribute to helping heal Connecticut's economy and get it moving in the right direction. But we can talk about that later in the show. But
definitely want to talk about that. So, Larry Dorman, these numbers must have come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. Should we believe without, I know you can't, there's no specific deal yet to vote on, but there were some pretty specific numbers there. When they talk about a $713 million savings in the first year at $849 million over the second, that a $17,400 sacrifice per worker when you count the retroactive raises they want to get since you've been working without a contract since last summer. Those numbers must be something. They must be on a piece of paper somewhere that they're putting around that table.
And again, because nothing has been formalized, I just simply can't comment. I'm not trying to be evasive, Paul. I want to be respectful of the process, because we are working, our leaders have been working day and night, engaged in these discussions to reach a framework. But clearly, we understand what's going on. We're trying to find solutions. The governor did propose in his budget back in February. He made that he was looking for roughly 1.4 to 1.5 billion dollars in concessions from state employees. So it's no secret.
Over 2 years?
Correct, over the biennium.
So this will get him there.
So that was what he called for. The numbers have gone up, unfortunately, in terms of what they had wanted from state employees. But again, we are in really intense discussions, and I think it would say anything more would be harmful to the process. But we are doing our absolute best, and once, if and when CBAC leadership approves it, then there's going to be something to talk about that just hasn't happened as I speak to this morning.
So, and are we already seeing the reactions, Larry, to
Yes.
the unofficial stuff that came out?
Correct.
The challenge we face in Connecticut and how the two sides see it differently. So as you pointed out, 15 union leaderships have to approve a deal before it goes to a vote to members, right? 15 different unions in CBAC,
Right.
and that's the acronym for the
State
15
Employee
unions.
Bargaining Agent Coalition.
And then the rank and file has to approve it, which
Yes.
will feel like they've been working without a contract since last summer.
Correct.
That they, when this whole budget mess started, when Malloy first took office in 2011, they were the first ones to take $1 billion worth of concessions.
Mhm.
And we have this huge pension problem that they
Right.
had caused that
Right.
started with Governor Rowland and Democratic governor too, agreeing to defer payments.
Yep.
And now we're down to 1%
Yeah.
assets covering our retiree health plans. But so that's a tall order to get all that approval. And at the same time, even this supposed agreement or not tentative prospective agreement that Malloy's asking for, and it sounds like what you're saying is Malloy's asking for this and then trying to put it out there as though you guys have agreed it to up the pressure perhaps. But even this got slammed yesterday from business leaders and from Republicans.
Yeah.
They don't like it because they say this is such a big deficit with $5 billion over 2 years that we got to be able to come back and get more layoffs. We can't give away our ability to do more layoffs. And they also want there to be a 401k plan to replace pensions for new employees.
That's right.
How do you feel about those two ideas?
I'm offended by both of them. They're absolutely the wrong solution for Connecticut's economy, and it's been proven time and again. And you can look at two Midwestern states to see the study in contrast. Wisconsin stripped public workers of collective bargaining rights, then enacted right-to-work legislation. Scott Walker, kind of a Koch brothers puppet who got elected back in 2010. The net impact of those cuts in Wisconsin, public employees have suffered $10,000-$15,000 pay cuts. They've lost their benefits. Some of them have lost their jobs. Wisconsin's economy is not doing well. Minnesota, by contrast, Governor Mark Dayton increased the minimum wage, pushed through legislation increasing taxes on a small portion of the extremely wealthy in Minnesota, and is working with the legislature to invest in infrastructure and other kinds of investments. And Minnesota's economy is faring much better than Wisconsin, or Kansas, another state that's on the attack against workers. So when Dennis Claritas and the Republicans call for blood and flesh off the bones of public employees, what they're really proposing is to damage Connecticut's middle class and take more money out of the pockets of everyday working people like Cherlyn. Because the cuts would affect not just state workers, they'd affect municipal workers. So they're pushing austerity. Austerity is destructive and simply has no place to play as a strategy in a state like Connecticut that is the wealthiest state in the country. There are more millionaires since 2011, more billionaires is the current report. It's a pretty good place to be a rich person, and I'm not knocking them at all. I'm simply saying that we have to have a smarter, fairer approach to how we raise revenues in the state, and part of that approach means asking the extremely wealthy and big corporations to sacrifice a little bit, as Cherlyn's workers have. The state workers are being asked to do time and again to make the economy work in a fair and progressive fashion.
Now, the one proposal that's been on the table from some of the Democrats, but not the leaders, and tell me if I got this right, is to increase the income tax on wealth over either $500,000 or $1 million from 6.3% to 6.9%. Is that correct? Would that be one way?
That sounds correct, and I don't know how much of a, quite frankly, I don't know where that stands right now, but it's at least the proposal is.
And the reason it sounds like it doesn't have a great chance is that the Democrats are split, and they barely have a majority. They're split in the Senate, and they have a small, I think, 8-vote majority in the House.
Right.
Malloy seems to be wed to this idea of no tax hikes. The two arguments I hear from Martin Looney, who over the years supported progressive taxation,
Right.
saying we're not going to get more money if we do that. That for whatever reason we've shifted in the last bunch of years our income tax system to make it more progressive, which is good, to rely more on the financial sector in Fairfield County. And for whatever reason, those millionaires and billionaires, as Bernie likes to say, Bernie Sanders, they have been reporting a lot less income than we thought. And every 3 months, our projections for income taxes falls through the floor because they're not reporting as much income.
Right.
So what Looney and others are saying is if we raise that rate, we're actually could end up getting less money because it's not, we need to diversify what we're depending on. But then the progressive Democrats say that that's not true, that our surrounding states already charge those rates.
Right.
So it's not that they're all going to move to New York or New Jersey or Massachusetts, that they think that there is still room to move there.
And I guess I just have to respectfully disagree with the senator and anybody who says that, because again, Forbes, I think Forbes magazine was the source. Dan Hart, the Harvard Journal, reported it. There are more millionaires and billionaires in Connecticut. General Electric, that became quite the political scuffle when they left Fairfield, the HQ, their chief corporate operations, and went to Boston. They relocated to Massachusetts because of the investment of education infrastructure, et cetera. Massachusetts is a higher tax state. So I just have to respectfully disagree with that. I think the issue is we need a smarter, fairer way of raising revenues that includes, for example, closing that carried interest tax loophole. I don't want to get too geeky, but
that prevent, and I forget if the numbers exactly, but it allows someone who's made money, I believe, in a hedge fund or equity fund, to report income as in a different way that is carried interest, so they pay only something like 15% on it rather than in the 30s. Yeah.
So people making hundreds of millions of dollars, and again, not questioning their right to do that in this system in which we all operate, they're paying less than the truck driver, the parks worker, the librarian in New Haven. They're paying less in taxes effectively than everyday working people, and that's just morally and financially wrong. So closing that loophole, Josh Elliott from Hampton and other reps, Robin Porter from New Haven, sponsored that legislation, and the indications are that it could bring in $300 to $500 million. Don't think it's going to scare the hedge fund people away. They'll use that as a threat. But why is it that in the end you have legislators saying, well, we can't ask the wealthy and big corporations to sacrifice anymore, but we can't ask the middle and working class folks to reach into their pockets to.
So let's say
that's unfair.
Let's say that the Bernie Sanders fairy godfather came to Connecticut, and we got everything you're asking. You got the 6.99% of marginal income tax rate. You got the carried interest fixed. We legalize pot. We get the tolls going, and we raise all these new revenues.
Right.
Would that still close a $5 billion gap?
It put us in a heck of a lot better position. It put us in a stronger position than we are now. Because again, public employees, and I'll bring it back to one of your original questions about public employees, state workers, municipal workers like those who Cherlyn represents in New Haven, have made economic concessions time and again, years of zeros, higher health insurance, increased contributions to their pensions, et cetera, et cetera. And, at some point we have to fix the system so that we're not doing things like asking unionized workers or non-unionized workers to take pay cuts.
Mm-hmm.
The governor's budget called for a reduction in earned income tax credit.
I was surprised.
So how does that help? Again, taking money out of the pockets of everyday people means there's going to be less money circulating in New Haven's neighborhoods, in New Haven stores. There's less consumer purchasing power going on. People can't send their kids to college if they're able to do that. A whole lot of bad things start to happen, and it becomes kind of this tidal wave of economic misery.
So it sounds to me like Larry Dorman is saying we can either just keep battening the hatches and have the flood get higher,
right,
or find a way through revenues to
right. And I would just, yeah, and you're absolutely right. I just would say that to me, it's the stark contrast is austerity versus investment.
Hmm.
And I would much rather choose the side of investment than austerity.
And again, bringing back GE, the memos from the company were that they went to Boston because there was investment in the education sector there that they thought made it a better environment.
Right.
Now, what about pensions? How do we fix that when we've gotten so low and we're so
Well,
underfunded?
we're trying, and you can see I brought a whole bunch of paperwork with me. But state employees on the state pensions you're talking about, state employees have agreed multiple times to benefit changes. The average state employee pension right now is probably closer to $30,000, and that number is dropping as more new workers enter the system, Paul. And in just 2011, when we did the last round of concessions, we agreed to the creation of a new pension tier. But earlier this year, the General Assembly, as well as the unions, approved a new funding mechanism to kind of level off the funding issues that are coming up to avoid having a huge liability down the line. So that was a good move. But what I want to show you is, because it's not a union document, the National Institute on Retirement Security, NIRSonline.org, had an interesting report that's relevant to New Haven, which is that state and local government pensions support 33,792 jobs that paid $1.9 billion in wages and salaries. State and local pensions generated $5.4 billion in total economic output and $1.3 billion in federal, state, and local tax revenues in the state of Connecticut. So I guess what I'm pontificating here, Paul, is that we need more retirement security. That's why our union fought for the bill that Trump wants to now destroy, which allows states to create state-level retirement plans for people whose companies don't offer them.
Oh, right. That was a bill we had last year.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Trump administration is intent on destroying that by.
Now, the Republicans are big on these 401k.
Yep.
Which, as I understand, it seems like some magic bullet they say that'll reduce our liability. But doesn't that put people's pensions at the whim of the market, so you don't really have a secure retirement? Didn't people get creamed at their 401k when we have these wide
401ks
changes in the stock market?
401ks are a failed experiment. Some of the creators of the 401k were featured in a Wall Street Journal article back in January of 2017, admitting that it's a failed experiment and it was never meant to be a substitute for a normal, stable retirement. So you're absolutely right.
I mean, I know what little, I don't have a pension, but with stuff I score over retirement, the last place I'd ever put it is anywhere near the stock market.
And that's the problem, is that, a defined benefit, a traditional pension is a much more stable investment vehicle, and it's more likely to.
But there's a lot of money to be made in the financial industry.
Right, this is a gift to 401ks. Look, you got to be clear here. A gift to Wall Street. It's a gift to Wall Street brokers. And what happens is people's investments fluctuate wildly. They will borrow against their 401k, and so more and more people are actually approaching retirement with nothing in their 401k.
And actually, I read something recently that even traditional pensions, some of the pension plans have been investing in equity funds that took big fees and actually did a terrible job managing their money.
Exactly, and 401ks are fine, and they're not like evil in and of themselves, but they are savings plans. They are not retirement plans. There's a big difference. But what's even more irresponsible, people in New Haven have called for 401ks. People at the state level call for 401ks. You shut down a pension system and move to a 401k, the funding gets cut off. So you're going to have fewer dollars going in to pay the obligations of retirees. So you're actually going to put a municipality or a state government in really dangerous waters by just abruptly closing off a pension plan and moving to a 401k. And there was a state legislative study that verified that 2 years ago when legislative Republicans were calling for it. It just doesn't make sense.
What does make sense is that you're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH Radio, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM, and live stream from NewHavenIndependent.org. We're talking about tough budget times and the role of workers in government with Larry Dorman, spokesman for AFSCME and State Line, and Cherlyn Pindexter, AFSCME Local 3144, president in New Haven, represents management and professional workers. So Cherlyn, you're listening to this, you've heard a lot of this these days. What's it like for a local municipal union president like yourself to hear the scary news coming out of Hartford every day. How do you see that impacting your workers?
I think that it's very scary. But I think that the city of New Haven, we already have had cutbacks and layoffs, and people are working, doing more for less, and the city is already under strain as it is already. So it is a very scary situation right now at the city of New Haven.
Right, and Cherlyn, I think that while we argue about a lot of things in New Haven, I think everyone I've talked to agrees with what you just said, which is that in the last 5 to 10 years, if you look at the Parks Department, if you look at Public Works, we've cut the number of employees quite a bit, and we've asked people to do more efficiently, which isn't always bad, but most people don't think we have room to cut if we want to still get our trash picked up and get our parks cleaned. So we're now hearing, Cherlyn, that we're going to be cut at least $10 million or more from the state from what we were expecting this coming year, and that it could get worse. So usually that kind of thing rolls downhill. So what's your union stance going to be if more layoffs are proposed?
As you know, the last contract we did was very concessionatory. We took zeros on most of the things. We changed the pension fund and went to a tiering system. So I think the workers have done quite a bit to help the city in these tough times. I think that the city needs to now look at executive management staff, and they have had no increase in their medical costs. They've had no increases in their pensions. They receive raises. They do not pay. The city's asked. Other unions have just recently come to agreements with the city to pay for retiree medical. They do not pay for retiree medical. They also have a 401A plan that the employee pays nothing into, and the city pays up to 17% for. So I think
so there's no question that executive staff is getting a better deal. It's small. So let's pretend we have this Bernie Sanders godfather coming again, fairy godmother, father coming to New Haven and doing everything progressive unions want. Let's say they said no more raises for executive staff. They're going to have to pay into their health care the way everybody else does, their pensions as well. That might save us a few $1 million. Where do you think the rest is going to come from? Do you think there's a chance to raise more revenue? People in New Haven, we don't usually hear the same arguments we're hearing from the state. A lot of people still feel we can raise more money from the state, that we have wealthy people who aren't taxed as much as in neighboring states, that there's the carried interest loophole. In New Haven, there's often a feeling that if we do try to raise property taxes any higher, people are just going to move out and we're going to get less tax revenue. Do you think there are ways to solve this citywide, the way we're talking statewide, with new revenues, or is it how we manage the cuts?
I think it's also how the spending, that there's a clear spending problem in New Haven. So I think it's a combination of a number of things that they can do, or to come up with the rest of the money, or come up with the majority of the money. But I think you first have to start by just first sitting down and taking a look at everything as a whole, and not just going straight for the workers and their benefits. I think you have to look at everything.
So you're saying do it holistically, and you already brought up an example of executive salaries and benefits. So that would definitely be one place you could start. Any ideas what else? Because whenever people say we have a spending problem, they do usually use that as code for laying off people and cutting their benefits. What kind of spending do you see that is out of control in New Haven?
They subcontract out a lot of work. A lot of work is subcontracted out to private entities. I think that, I don't know if you remember a while ago, when the mayor came in, she said she was going to bring back work into that was subcontract out, bring it back in.
Public Works, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, not only Public Works, it was the custodian work. It was like a lot of stuff is subcontract out to attorneys. So there's a lot of things that are subcontracted out. There was a committee formed. We were going to the meetings. We were part of the conversation. Then all of a sudden that all went to the wayside. I think that's something that really needs to be taken a look at. I'm sure they're spending well over $1 million on outside attorneys doing work that could be done in other manners or by other people.
So you brought up some examples here: executive pay and salaries, a committee that you said has gone by the wayside of looking how to save money on contracting. Now you've heard the same arguments I've heard, Cherlyn, when they subcontracted out, let's say some of the cleanup work at the schools. They said that actually saved them money because I guess union costs, they're trying to cover union costs, and the and flexible work rules. They said because like you need someone 2 hours here, 2 hours there. But also with the attorneys, what they argue is because our attorneys don't get paid as much as the big shot attorneys the city's often up against, that you actually lose a lot more money if you don't have a hot shot attorney you're paying as well to go to the table. Do you think that's not true? Do you think in-house we can deal with it?
I think that I think that in some cases it may be true, but I think you have to look at everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just assume that that's the case. If you're trying to save money and cut costs, then you need to bring everything to the table. Nothing should be.
So you're saying challenge our assumptions, because sometimes people say it's an excuse as a cover to give a friend a contract, and that it can cost us more in the end. And other times they say there are times when it actually saves us money. And then the third argument is that sometimes we don't want to save that money that way. Maybe we don't want to have people have to work 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, and not get health benefits.
Well, even with the custodians that I told you about, the thing with the custodians, don't forget, after everything that happened with the custodian, those people have now formed a union. And you could have kept the people that you had already. I think that the part of the thing about what the union is that you have to come to the table and bargain. If you want to change hours, if you want to do something different than what the contract says, you have to come to the table. And that's what the union is about, is to come and bargain something different than what you already have. But the city doesn't want to come to the table a lot of times. So I think that if they just come to the table and discuss things and you need to bargain in good faith too. You need to come clean at exactly what you want and why you want it. And then maybe the union will be more amped to come to the table and give it to you. But you have to first start by sitting down and having a conversation.
So what would be an example where they didn't come clean about what they wanted and it kind of soured the environment?
With the petition, I guess that would be an example.
Okay, let's tell people what the petition is. So the city has a petition to redefine who's in your union. So you're the management and professional union, and they say you have a lot of members who are secretaries and other people who aren't managers, so they shouldn't be in that union. And they say that sometimes you have someone reporting to somebody else, and they're both in this union when in fact only one's a manager. That's their argument. You've said that you feel the petition that they have to changes in your union is just a cover to take half of your members away because you're a fighting union and you stand up for your workers, so they want to make you weaker by taking half of your members away when in fact over the years it's been the city administration that has agreed to how to define these workers and what unions they should go in. Is that a fair way, Cherlyn, to give both sides of the argument?
I think that the other piece you're missing is I think that they want positions that are in my union as well to put people out of it in order to put people they want in. She wants more positions to put people in. But Mayor Harp and Rosa DeLauro were one of the founders. Each were a founder of my local.
When they worked in the city. Now one is now the mayor, one's now the congresswoman.
That's correct. And Larry Amendola as well. I make sure I say his name because he was also the president for over 25 years, and he was one of the founders as well. But Mayor Hart, when she worked for the city of New Haven and the Human Resource Department, she did not supervise anybody, and she was a member of the bargaining unit. So the union has taken turns, of course, over the years. But I don't put the people in my union. The city of New Haven does. They decide what, positions belong in what union. And over the years with attrition and layoffs and retirements, it has changed because we supervise people who are in the other unions, 884, 71, 68. And over time, those unions have had layoffs or retirements and those positions weren't filled. So that changed the dynamic of my union as well. So I don't, and the way that the petition was done is not going to accomplish what the city claims
So you're
they
saying,
want.
Cherlyn, that the city would have originally put someone in your union, because they're supervising someone in another union, and then with later budget cuts, the person that got supervised lost the job. They didn't refill it, so your person went from being someone who supervised someone else who actually did that job. So the question then becomes, how do you fix that? Are you saying they're not doing this in good faith because you guys have been at odds and it would just take a lot of your power away? Is there another way to fix it, or does it not need fixing? Is it okay to just change what you're called rather than management professional unions just call it something else?
You just leave the union alone. Yeah, I mean, if you can change the name of it, that would be fine. But I mean, the way the petition is written and it will never fix it. It's not gonna fix it. Because they're continuing, and because and also too, as you know, Paul, you were at the civil service meeting. They're continuing to put positions in my union that don't supervise people. So if
you're talking about the Commission on Equal Opportunities, was it?
No, the civil service board meeting.
Yeah, they have a new position that they were putting in, and
they put in new positions all the time, every week, and those positions do not supervise people. So if you know that that is not a supervisory position, then why are you putting it in 3144?
So I wonder if a way to combat that strategy would be to merge with one of your other unions that has lost those jobs. Then you have more power to bring to the table, because they have CBAC at the state. What if you had one of the smaller unions with people you supervise and lost those positions? What if you guys merged and came back and brought more power to the table with the city?
I don't think merging. I don't think that will be. I mean, it may be something that they consider somewhere down the road, down the line, but.
Yeah, and there are legal issues to that
Yeah.
too, even if unions wanted to, not speaking directly about New Haven, just in terms of the state labor board and, other, authorities, it wouldn't be done that easily, but, if I can just jump in for 2 seconds, I think part of the problem with this, petition to take the bulk of the membership out of 3144 is, Paul, is that, one, you're gonna put people into lower paying positions and take away, civil service is a great path to upward mobility. You take them out of Cherlyn's bargaining unit, you've taken away upward mobility. Secondly, I think it's important to say that when you take positions out of the bargaining unit, you're also going to create a bunch of non-unionized positions. One of the things collective bargaining unions do is they militate against the Tammany Hall model, the old Tammany Hall model.
That's why civil service came into being.
Right, and if you have people who are going to be hired and fired at the whim of the mayor and his or her, in this case her, top advisors, you're not doing things in the public interest, you're doing things more in self.
Now, how many people in the union now, and how much do they want to reduce it?
There's almost 400 people in the union now, and there's about 120 something people. I'm going to say approximately, because I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but that's on the petition.
So they want to take away more than a quarter of your members, closer to a third. And
yes.
What is the status of the petition?
We're still in arbitration.
It's in arbitration.
Having hearings.
And,
yeah.
and just because you asked a really good question about kind of reining in some of the reckless spending, Paul, or ways to spend smarter.
Yeah.
The Harp administration has expended tremendous amounts of taxpayers' money on legal fees, not just with this case, but with terminations.
Case with Nicole Jefferson,
the
CEO.
Nicole Jefferson case. And again, private attorneys are retained. And so, we're talking about spending hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars in kind of a needless fight to hammer one union or to go after Nicole Jefferson or, whatever the case is. But they're spending a lot of money on lawyers. And again, that's probably not the wisest path when you're looking at potential cuts from the state. And when you need to invest in kids and in schools and human and social service programs, let's not be spending money on outside lawyers in a needless fight.
But let's remind people that listen to Dateline New Haven and WNHH New Haven's home for community radio at 103.5 FM and live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Cherlyn Pindexter of ASME 3144 and Larry Dorman of ASME Council 4 statewide are here in the studio. So what does this mean for politics? Obviously, a lot of decisions get made by people who are elected. Cherlyn, AFSCME in the past has endorsed Mayor Harp, I believe, in the first election. They made no endorsement last time. There's going to be a race this year with Marcus Paca and Tony Harp for mayor. Do you folks plan to make an endorsement in this election?
That's going to be, ultimately, we, from the Council 4 level, and I'll certainly let Cherlyn answer for our local, we consult with our locals, Paul, and it's much too early right now. So we'll have to take a wait and see approach, but we're not going to make any municipal endorsements until we've had a chance to go through our process, which means we interview and discuss issues with candidates, not just for mayor, but the entire board of alders, or those who want our union's endorsement, and then talk to our members as well. And we do that process in conjunction with our local unions. We have several here in New Haven, so it's going to take a few weeks and months to play out.
We don't even know all the people running yet. Cherlyn, do you have any initial instincts about that election, mayor election?
No, not at all. And those endorsements, once again, comes through my local from the membership, and I do nothing unless it's the members.
Always people in New Haven who don't agree with labor, like when they comment on the Independent, they'll often talk about, quote, the unions, close quote. So Unite Here represents workers at Yale. They're the biggest, most active union in town, most politically powerful. They have endorsed over 20 members of the Board of Alders out of 30, many of whom actually work for them. So whenever something happens with AFSCME or the teachers union, they suggest that this is a coordinated effort by all of labor. I wonder whether actually the opposite is true to the detriment of labor. I don't see a lot of labor solidarity on municipal issues. Like, for instance, the teachers union appears to have no relationship with Unite Here. And they don't seem to have any kind of common platform they push about, let's say, charter schools or union contracts. And correct me if I'm wrong, Cherlyn, but I don't see a lot of coordination with AFSCME and Unite Here about what to ask the Board of Alders to do or City Hall to do. Is that true?
From my, well, I don't think so, but we talk at our level. We're well aware of Unite Here's struggles, and they're well aware of ours. But if you're making a broader point about public and private sector unions needing to come together, I can't disagree with that.
But even an agenda, like I asked the Unite Here people, what do you think about education? I still don't know 5 years later how they feel about charters, because a lot of their members like to get people into charter schools. They're glad they're there. The teachers union feel a real threat as the charter movement is sort of a billionaire funded effort to get rid of union power.
Right. And you hit a really good issue, and I didn't need to take Cherlyn's time because I want my sister to answer here. I just think that, and it's a topic for another show, which is, the labor movement has to reinvent itself on the fly. And that means building stronger coalitions between public and private unions, between unions of the community, because we're under a threat from the president and his new Supreme Court justice, and they'll probably have more justices. So I think what you're pointing to is actually, quite frankly, a flaw in the labor movement that we need to figure out how we're going to speak to people's concerns and worries and maintain our.
And we've been seeing this for years as the labor outside, actually public sector unions are our last readout, really, as well as the Yale unions in New Haven. And nationally, I think we're down below 10% in private sector union. And part of that's the laws affect everything. And if you elect Donald Trump, you're going to have a National Labor Relations Board that makes it hard to organize.
Exactly.
When they elected FDR, that's what helped unions. But you have to organize first. But I'm just wondering, whether there are non-traditional ways to build union power. So some unions, for instance, food workers, have been organizing associations as opposed to bargaining units to push for a higher minimum wage. And we've seen those campaigns, the Working Families Party. I know that John Wilhelm, the retired head of the Yale unions, told me that 10 years ago, he said he saw this happening. And he said internationally, we've got to have alliances because so much work can be moved to other countries where there are not union protections. And just the way we got national guilds formed when the railroad made national commerce out of local commerce, the way the internet and shipping and other advances have made international commerce of what used to be national commerce means that labor needs to catch up with capital and find creative new ways to organize. But in the meantime, you still got day-to-day challenges for people like you, Larry, at the Capitol with this talks with the Des Moines administration or Cherlyn here in New Haven, where you can have some pretty tough nuts and bolts decisions to make coming up. How do you organize for that, Cherlyn? Because a lot of questions get raised about how much do you cooperate with the government to try to find solutions, and how much do you try to build independent base of power to keep them honest? When you think of your job, is your job, if you're going to fight for your workers, does that involve more keeping them honest on their toes when they're doing wrong, or is it more developing the relationships where they trust you, you trust them, and then you find the ways to make the fairest outcome?
I think it's a combination of them both, because if you trust them, then you should be able to go to the table and sit down with them, and they should be able to recognize when there's a problem with your contract. But if you cannot trust them, then your job is to protect the language and the members of your local. Because overall, if they are not honoring the agreement that you already have in place, and they continue to do things to violate it, then how can you trust them? Mm-hmm. So that's the problem. And, my job is not to constantly keep them on their toes. My job is to make sure that they honor and respect the collective bargaining agreement and the membership, and to protect the work. And that's what keeps my people working, or our people in my local working. So that is my job.
And you're working without a contract right now, right?
That's correct.
So when did that contract expire?
July of 2015.
So are we working under the old terms with the assumption that when new terms are reached, there'll be retroactive raises? I mean, that's 2 years almost now.
That's the hope.
So almost 2 years. Where are we in those negotiations?
We're in it.
Are we far? Are we near to a conclusion? I mean, how are the talks going?
Good.
Oh, they are going good.
Yeah, I mean we're negotiating. So
that's all you can say.
Well, why does it take 2 years, you think?
I don't know. Contract negotiation is not easy. People think you just go into a room and you say what you want, and they say what they want, and you both go, okay, no problem. That's not how it happens.
Are you optimistic that you guys are going to come to terms?
I'm always optimistic, Paul. I'm looking forward to ending contract negotiation at some point. But I want it to be fair across the board. My people, as I said before, the contract was always concessionatory, and they're making less than they did years ago by paying more and working hard, harder than they ever did before. There's less staff, so they're working more, and I would like them to have a decent and raise and benefits and all the things that go along with that. So that's my hope, is to make sure that everybody get fair wages and increases and be able to have the better benefits.
Well, Cherlyn Pindexter, Larry Dorman, my hope is that your voices continue to be heard, that we don't just hear the voices of the people in charge as we enter a very tough time in Hartford and in New Haven, statewide and municipally, about how we're going to deal with some tough budget times.
Keep up the good work you do. Thank you for it.
Well, thank you so much for joining. Both of you, thank you so much for joining us today on the air. Please come back, and thanks for listening. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Book your flight with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.
It was fun. Thank you.
We still got one Cherlyn misspelled up here.
Yeah, I have to can't edit it right now.
Well, great job, guys.